Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in Studio West, joined by Ben Domenech, editor-at-large for The Spectator. He is also, of course, a Fox News contributor and a regular Friday Roundup guest of mine. Ben, good Friday to you. I hope you had a great St. Patrick's Day dance with your little girl.
I absolutely did. And you know what? The other dance is going for me pretty well right now as well because, knock on wood, I've only gotten 3 wrong, and none of them are more than one step deep. So,
very good. Very good. Let me talk to you about, since you're the parent of a young girl, I'm going to spend a lot of time in the next few weeks talking about a lawsuit called Foote versus Ludlow School Committee. Have you heard about this yet?
Yes, I have. But so, in terms of what your understanding is, well, I'll let you.
An 11-year-old girl begins to transition. Yep. Her parents tell the school, "Thank you very much for alerting to us. We're going to handle this. We're going to get counselors. Do not encourage her. Don't use the pronouns. Don't use any of that stuff." And the school blows off the parents and engage in a secret, a conspiracy, actually.
And one that is clearly intentional to hide what they are doing from the parents, which is the aspect of this that I think sticks so much in the craw of everyone. And let me take a step back and say, when I say everyone, I really do mean everyone. The people who are offended, about this are not just social conservatives. It's people who believe that they, ought to be having the authority in terms of directing the upbringing of their children generally, and that includes a lot of people who are solidly Democratic voters. And I would just say, having experienced most recently in terms of interactions with, people in schools in very blue areas, I will say this is something that cuts across a lot of traditional Democratic constituencies in a way that they are deeply uncomfortable with.
And I want to add, I'm not actually bringing this up to talk about the gender fluidity issue. I very rarely do that on the air because parents get uncomfortable, kids are coming home from school. I don't want to lose audience. I'm bringing it up because of the way the First Circuit handled it. The parents sued the school district. The district court dismissed the case under 42 U.S.C. 1983, and it went up to the appeals court. And 3 judges, 2 of them Biden judges with a combined 4 years experience on the bench, and 1 an Obama judge, ruled dramatically for the school district, and they did in a way, you have to trust me on this, of mutiny. They mutinied. They absolutely rejected longstanding precedents that are black-letter law about the right of parents to control the upbringing of their children. None of them would sign it. They signed it per curiam because none of the 3 judges want to own it. It may be the worst written legal opinion I've read in 30 years. I mean, it's really childish. You would be shocked. As an editor, you ought to read Foote v. Ludlow School Committee, Ben, because you'll just say, this isn't real.
You're going to make my brain hurt.
It is so bad. And I'm wondering, do you think the resistance is donned robes?
I think that this is a situation of a different kind of lawfare than we experienced in the first 4 years, meaning that the Democrats are flailing at this moment. You see it. I see it. The fact that Chuck Schumer is having to actually make phone calls to get people to back him publicly is an astounding event. And I think that, can you imagine Nancy Pelosi doing that?
No.
That's absurd. And so they are flailing. They don't know which direction to go. They're at odds with over not just these issues, but other issues as well. And so because of that, I think it's given a feeling of license to the resistance-minded folks who are, inhabiting robes at the moment, to feel like, this is the way that I can stand up in this moment. I can be a hero for the cause, and damn the law, damn any of the things that I, swore to uphold. I'm just going to do it anyway. And I think that has, in a short-term effect, it may be pleasing for them, but in the long term, it is absolutely toxic for the country.
Yeah, and I'm not easily shaken. I believe in the rule of law. I was poo-pooing people demanding the impeachment of Judge Boasberg, et cetera. I agreed with the Chief Justice because I believe eventually it will work out. But I read a First Circuit opinion like this, and I realize maybe these younger ideologues who got confirmed during the Biden years when Biden didn't really know who he was putting on the bench, maybe they're radical. And maybe the radicals are finally on the court. They marched through the long march through the institution.
This is the danger. This is the danger for institutionalists and like you, Hugh, who want to see the courts restored in terms of their position, their proper position within the American constitutional order, which is that if you have these radicals take over it and flout the law so directly and so blatantly that the average American understands that there's something deeply wrong going on, then the case for something like impeachment becomes a lot easier to make to constituents across the country who don't have the same barriers to that, who don't have the same knowledge of history that you do, certainly, and that many others do. And look, I am all for, I've been in the position generally that we should have more impeachments of federal officials. I don't like impeachments of judges for slightly different reasons. I would point out that, as you know, second impeachment that ever happened in the founding generation was of a judge who could not fulfill his job, was clearly corrupted by politics, and also showed up drunk repeatedly, and admitted so from the bench, in fact. So it's one of the things
that was Pickering. Chase was the second.
Yes.
Chase was the political one, and that's the one that failed. And I'm glad it failed.
So my view is this: if we're going to have a conversation about the impeachment of the judges, I just think we have a broader conversation about the number of district court judges that we have, the number of people who have been invested in this power, and whether that's something that actually is part of what the American system ought to be and how it ought to work. I'm not sure that the people in Congress, though, are prepared to have that conversation.
Oh, they're not.
I certainly don't think that. It's a lot easier to posture and just call for the impeachment of these folks, even though we know, just given the political numbers, that that's not going to lead to anything in terms of an ultimate outcome. And in fact, could distract from the kind of speedy agenda that this Congress and this president need in order to achieve things.
But I must say, I was so whipsawed yesterday because I wrote a long column defending the Chief Justice's rejection of impeachment and why we don't want that and why we want to approach institutional rule of law. And then I read this decision out of left field, and it's mutiny, and it's throwing stuff overboard, and the pirates are on the ship. And I said, maybe I have misjudged the depth of the problem. Now, let's go to the left. The left has caught themselves now in an iron triangle, I call it, of gender radicalism of the sort we were just talking about. Then we've got domestic terrorism, whether it's Tesla terrorism or supporting Hamas and Jew hunting on campuses, and climate justice extremism. They're actually, I missed how far to the left they went because I was focused on the infirmity of Joe Biden, but their party went nuts.
Well, and I think that part of that, too, by the way, is due to the lack of leadership within their party. You and I, both know the importance of statesmanship and the importance of leadership. And those leaders are able to offer the people, especially the radicals and those who might engage in such behavior as this, something that, approaches a form of healthy resistance that I think the Democrats are not capable of offering in this moment because they are dealing with a left wing that is so out of touch, that is so radical that, look, I'll be quite honest with you. I've passed by multiple Teslas today, including 2 Cybertrucks, just in my Fridays when I run a lot of errands for the family.
Yeah.
And each time I've been sort of keeping my head on a swivel, seeing is somebody going to come out of nowhere and swipe at these folks, or are they going to throw something at them? Because that's a totally believable incident to happen in this day and age, which is absurd. And look, my opinion is when you start blowing things up, that's when you go to jail. That's not about free speech or the lawful resistance that people ought to engage in. That is an act of, whether you want to call it anti-corporate terror or something else. It's completely unacceptable, and it deserves a total crack.
And the context is, 8 months ago, Donald Trump was shot in the head. Corey Compatore was murdered. 6 months ago, a second assassination attempt. The context is rising violence. And, of course, on our campuses, I'm very glad to see Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino find the 3 terrorists and arrest them the day after the Tesla attacks. Were you surprised that they acted that quickly?
Well, no, I'm glad that they did, because I think that they have their priorities straight and they understand a message needs to be sent that you're not going to get away with this. And look, we cannot afford to slide into a situation where we have a rump form of the democratic leftist regime that wants to reenact that period of bombings that happened, as we know, within your lifetime, and is not that long ago in terms of.
I can remember the townhouse blowing up in Manhattan. I can remember Madison, University of Wisconsin-Madison building blowing up. I'm a kid. I'm in junior high. Santa Barbara Bank building. Kent State happened 40 miles from my house. I don't want to go back there.
It's not that long ago, and it's not possible. It's not impossible for us to just slip back into that. I really do believe that.
I do too. Ben's going to talk to me during the break and come back afterwards because we got to do some serious stuff too. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm back with Ben Domenech during the break. Ben, afterwards we're going to talk about China and Russia and the Middle East, but I want to ask you about my theory that's what's happened to the Democrats. They're traumatized. They lost the media overnight. When Elon Musk took over X, the legacy media was exposed as shaky and without influence, and X was was revealed as the spinal cord of information distribution, and they no longer controlled it. And I think they're traumatized. What do you think?
I think that's a good summation of what's happened, but I also think that there's something else that's happened attendant with that, which is that what his purchase revealed was that there were a lot of people entirely outside of the normal strictures of the media career pipeline who were willing to say what they truly believed about all manner of things. And what I mean by that is I think that the media as a whole depended on a certain pipeline existence. Folks would go to the right schools. They would go through the right fellowships. They would come out at the end of that. And even if they went and worked for a conservative or right-leaning publication in some sense, Wall Street Journal or some of these other ones, they would always have in the back of their mind that, hey, if I want to end up at any of these other places, I need to be careful about what I say. I need to be careful about, restricting their, anybody's awareness of what I truly believe about things. And I need to toe the line when it's clear that there's not something that I should break away from for the sake of my career. And so what you had with these podcasters, with these independent journalists, with Substackers and the like, is people who had essentially broken away or never were part of that pipeline in the first place. And because of that, they owe none of that fealty that exists, I think, as an overarching thing for media.
Oh, that's interesting.
And instead, they can act truly independently, and that is extremely dangerous to the leftist regime.
Yeah, they have no muscle memory of conformity to the elite dominant opinion regime. And so
exactly.
There were assumptions about all sorts of ways of thinking that you could depart from and be at National Review or go with R. Emmett Terrell and crusade a little bit at the Heritage Foundation, but your muscle memory was still New York Times, Washington Post. That's all gone.
Yes, exactly. And that's all gone, and it's not coming back. And I think that they just woke up to the fact, really 6 months ago, that it's not coming back. And that is terrifying to them.
Well, it might mean that their leaders are really AOC and people to her left. And if that's the case, we're in the middle of a transition. They're going to be the Whigs. You can't win on that platform.
Hugh, I know I've mentioned it before, but when I talk to the more radical Democrats who I still know, when I see what they're posting, they're more interested in Jasmine Crockett than they are with it, trying to find anybody who can actually win back the center. And because of this, I think that they have very little in terms of what they want to offer the other side, and they truly rejoice when they see the kinds of things happening with Teslas and the like. When you see, the sort of the what was once considered kind of the mainstream of their party just kind of nodding their heads on it, that's a sign.
Yep. Stand by. I'm coming right back with Ben Domenech. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Ben Domenech is my guest. He is, of course, editor-at-large for The Spectator, Fox News contributor. He has his own podcast, which I think should be longer and more frequent, Ben, but that's just me.
I actually share that opinion, Hugh. Working on it.
Oh, well, I just think that you ought to get a group of your buddies. Unsolicited advice. The Ruthless podcast has demonstrated to me that 4 friends talking who know what they're talking about makes for the best podcast if they're smart. And so you get your 3 best friends and sit down and talk for an hour and a half, and you'll be up there doing the same thing that Ruthless is. You know that this actually, interviewing people takes some time and preparation to do it well. And so Secretary of State Rubio came in this week, and I prepared, and I began and I ended with China quite intentionally, because to me, we're in a war with China. Right now, it's a Cold War. It could be a hot war at any time. And his statement was that the 21st century will be the story of China and America, and we don't know what that story is going to be. Do you think Donald Trump believes that?
I think on a certain level that he does, but I also think that he believes that in this moment, what he has an opportunity to do is to dramatically expand the American footprint and obligation as he sees it, which is the project of the Western Hemisphere, in anticipation of something that may come after he is gone. And by that, I mean, I don't think he thinks that the Chinese are going to move on his watch. I think he has kind of faith in his own presence being a deterrent. But I think that he also understands that the threat that they represent is not going to be one that is held off for long, and that there has to be movements made within this beginning period to balance against that. I think that that's his understanding. Whether that's accurate or not, is up to you. But I do think that one of the things that he truly does understand is that his position right now is essentially setting the preparatory steps to make sure that we have the resources that we need, that we have the nuclear submarines that we need, that we have the resources in place already, because we're not going to be able to supply, Taiwan or anybody else in the region in terms of our allies, which is actually, from my perspective, more important in terms of preparing them for what their obligations are going to be, is something that has to be done now. It's not the same situation as in Europe where you can actually run things over ground.
I am thinking maybe I've underestimated his grasp of the world for a long time now, and maybe he understands that Xi is calling the shots in Ukraine. The North Koreans would not be in Russia unless Xi gave his consent. That's my opinion.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. No, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, one of the comments that he made when I interviewed him a couple of weeks ago was he said, many, many people are studying the war. And he said, including the North Koreans, and they even participated and sent their people in, and they learned the lesson hard. He said more things off the record, but that was one that he said.
So when you talk to the president, what do you sense he really is thinking about grand strategy over decades? Because we need a president right now to do that, because we didn't have that.
I don't know that to be the case, Hugh. I'm not sure that is the case. I think he's more instinctive, and he moves in these ways, in approaching the issues at the moment. But I do think he has the perspective of, his own opinion, I think, is China's not going to move while I'm here, in the same way he thought that Russia would not move while he was there. But in the aftermath of a presidency, they may be forced to move, and if they are forced to move, then we have a need to protect our interests in that region and the interests of our friends and allies. And look, I think that some of the steps that he's taken are mindful of that in a way that perhaps not informed by grand strategy, but the instinct can also line up with that.
What did you take away vis-a-vis Iran? Because Secretary Rubio, his comments to me made me believe Donald Trump's about out of time with Iran, and that he could very well punch that ticket this weekend if they shoot at the Truman again, and he may call up Netanyahu and the UAE and the kingdom and say, let's go. Did you get a sense he's about had it with Iran?
I think that he is absolutely fed up with it, and I think that the elevation of this, as they've done, is a sign of that. I think he views something like that as an insult to America's existence and to all of our interests in the region. And I think you're particularly right about this. He may be at the breaking point on something like that, which would have some pretty profound effects if there is the kind of follow-up that I know Netanyahu would like to pursue.
Well, let's close with Netanyahu. As we speak, Israel's being convulsed. Now it's Shabbat, so they're not being convulsed tonight, but they were last night, and they will be again tomorrow after the Sabbath. And they've got an actual constitutional crisis there because the Supreme Court, without, again, I'm not an Israeli lawyer and I'm not a Jew, so I don't know, but it seems to me it's quite extraordinary for the Supreme Court to tell the prime minister of a country not to fire the head of your security services, and for the attorney general to act like a free agent. She strikes me as a complete ego-driven, just completely ego-driven diva.
On the surface, it certainly appears that way.
Yeah, so what do you think is going to happen there? Because they're teetering on the edge of genuine crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could have the answer for you on this. I don't have a crystal ball, of course, but I will say that, Netanyahu has guided Israel through the crisis of the past several months, always surrounded by this kind of pushback and blowback, and now it seems to be reaching a fever pitch. But I do think that it's very, he has always relied on the importance of the relationship with America to inform his actions, and I don't think he's going to be doing something right now that it does not have the backing of this administration. He views that as of supreme importance.
All right, last question, Ben. You talk to people on both sides of the aisle throughout the Beltway. You're very well connected among especially people of your generation. Are the Democrats increasingly embarrassed by what we're finding out happened or didn't happen in the Biden years by the Regency? I would be embarrassed to have anything to do with the Biden administration.
It is. I will just give you this anecdote. I know multiple people who served within that administration who, had jobs that were at a distance from the White House, meaning they were not inside the building. They were in other buildings, and they are aghast and embarrassed. And they have expressed that to me personally in ways that say, basically, I'm not sure about what this does to my resume. I'm not sure about what this does to my long-term career, because people are going to assume, rightly or wrongly, that I knew what was going on when, in reality, it was the sort of situation where, a lot of them, they were working for cabinet secretaries and the like who weren't even getting meetings with him. So they couldn't even know what was going on. And so it's the kind of thing where I think that this is going to have a ripple effect for a generation of Democrats who thought that they were serving the country. And as it turned out, we're serving the interests of Biden staffers who were not serving the best interests of the country or even of him.
I had Lord Andrew Roberts on yesterday, and we talked about the fact FDR at Yalta was incompetent. Biden in the last 2 years was incompetent. Woodrow Wilson was in a coma for 6 months. We really don't have a system built for this, do we?
No, we don't. And it's going to continue to be a problem as long as we have politicians, particularly a problem, is not to be ageist, but as long as we have politicians who are as old as some of the people that we still have within the system.
Oh, we can be ageist. You're talking to an old guy. I think we ought to put a cap on the top of everything, because the framers did not intend 80-year-olds to be running the government. Ben Domenech, always a pleasure. Have a great weekend. Follow him on X at @BDomenech. Go listen to the Ben Domenech Show. Hopefully you're going to get a podcast that goes longer, further, deeper, funnier, more sports, more entertaining friends, because I'd listen to that.
Sounds like a plan to me.
I'd listen to it, Ben. I'd listen to it. Don't go to America. I'm Hugh Hewitt.